A few years ago, I worked for a couple of months in a pastry shop. To work there, my boss promised me 8 hours a day except Mondays, half day, and Thursdays, closed, and €700 a month, obviously all off the books. Although I had some resentment about working illegally, I accepted anyway because I needed some money. The first day of work, I was in there for 11 hours, from 5:30 a.m. to 1:30 p.m., and then from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. I thought it was normal since it was my first day, even if in reality some doubts came to me right away because all the others had been there as much as me, and for them, it was certainly not the first day. The situation continued to be this, hours ranging from 10 to sometimes 13 hours a day. Furthermore, for 2 weeks in a row, on Monday, the day on which we were only supposed to work in the morning, we instead worked with the schedules of the other days. At the end of the month, I asked for my well-deserved salary, and my boss got angry telling me that I was only thinking about money when in reality, I hadn't even asked him to pay me for the multiple hours of overtime. He then told me that he would pay everyone at the end of the first week of the following month. The following day, after working as usual for 11 hours, at the end of the shift he called me aside telling me that since I had been presumptuous, I had to show up for work on Thursday, even though it was my day off. Obviously, I got angry and replied that I had worked much longer hours than those agreed, and that I would not show up for work on my day off. And so I did. Thursday came, I didn't show up, ignoring hundreds of calls from my boss and his wife. The next day, I showed up for work regularly and was severely reprimanded and then sent home for bad behavior. He told me that we would meet on Sunday to give me the money, and then I didn't have to show up again, which I already wanted to do. So Sunday arrived and showed up with €300, telling me that I had done little this month and that I hadn't been respectful towards him and his business. I got very angry and also went to call my father, who was waiting for me in the car. The two almost came to blows. So I took my father and we left, saying it wasn't over there. I kept in touch with some of my colleagues, some even over 18, with whom I had established a good relationship and who also worked illegally. They told me that, the next day, he had badmouthed me, saying that I was a person without any form of respect and dignity. In Italy we say una cosa inutile. They had witnessed the scene the previous Friday and were speechless. They thought I had to do something and not let me walk on my head like this. And they were right. So I decided to do something that no one has ever had the courage or the will to do, or rather go to finance to denounce the fact that he made most of his employees work illegally and that he exploited them by underpaying them. Obviously not alone, but with my colleagues, also tired of being exploited, to support me. So we decided on a day and time for a pop check and waited. The agreed day was Saturday morning from 9 to 10, the day and time when there was usually more workload. It goes without saying that, contrary to what is thought of in Italy, sometimes justice works, and that day finance with a surprise check discovered the whole situation and immediately closed the business. Subsequently, the owner as well as my former boss was investigated and sentenced to I don't remember how many years in prison. The business was seized, and now his family is having to pay more than €1 million in tax evasion for other reasons related to false receipts and other things that I don't quite understand.
Next story.
I immediately have to write this down because it is the most amazing thing I have ever heard. I was visiting my grandma and grandpa to celebrate a bunch of summer birthdays together, but when I pulled up to their house, the plot to the right was completely empty. As in no stones, no base, no debris, just slightly overgrown grass. Grass, where there used to be a house. When the hellos were said and the party started, I absolutely had to know what happened, so I went to ask my grandparents, and goodness gracious, I was not expecting the roller coaster of a story they told me. A couple of years ago, my grandparents had some very unpleasant neighbors. Loud at all hours, trash in the yard, arguing with other people on the street, just absolute nuisances. It was a husband and wife, and their adult son who would come and go irregularly. The wife would get into arguments with anyone about anything, and the husband would physically intimidate the people who spoke up for themselves. They weren't sure what exactly was the deal with the son, but it couldn't have been anything good, as it was well known he had been in the county jail more than a few times. The house apparently reflected the tenants, as it looked awful. It was sagging and dilapidated, loose beams and peeling paint, but nothing was ever done about it due to the guy who rented out the place being a slumlord. We'll get to him later. It all came to a breaking point one night when my grandparents returned home to find their back door smashed in and some of my grandpa's guitars missing. Now Grandpa loves his music and has been singing and playing his whole life, so it's safe to say those guitars are not only very memorable to him, but damn expensive too. They of course went to the police, and after some digging they found that the guitars had been sold at a pawn shop or someplace by the son. They couldn't get the guitars back, unfortunately, but I believe my grandparents were fairly compensated since the guitars were insured. Tile guitars have insurance. Given how expensive the guitars were, the theft was absolutely a felony, and the son once again ended up in jail. After that, the neighbors would harass my grandparents through the fence or on their porch, meaning it was difficult for them to even sit outside. They would call them foul names, throw trash over the fence, and the husband would still try to get physical. Now, while my grandpa is a very chill and mellow guy, my grandma will take shit from no one, especially not jerks like these. So what did she do? She got the house condemned. It was easy for her to do, really. She called the local authorities, general attorney, property manager, I dunno. And they came and did an inspection, though it was clear by the outside of the house that it hadn't been properly maintained for a long time. One call led to more calls, and the property was deemed unfit to live in, which forced the rude neighbors to move out. I'm not sure what happened to them or where they went, but supposedly they were put up in a nearby hotel by the slumlord until the house could be fixed. Woo, foreshadowing. Now enter the slumlord. Of course his tenants told him who had reported the house, so of course he's upset with my grandparents. Rather than fix the house, though, he gets aggressive the first day he's there, yelling at my grandparents about how they're idiots for reporting him and how they cost him a bunch of money, and he's gonna sue them, and on and on. It gets to the point where the across-the-street neighbors called the local police to come defuse the situation, which they do. A few weeks pass, and my grandma hasn't seen the slumlord or anyone around to fix the house. Not being one to let things go easily, Grandma starts making frequent calls to a bunch of services, reporting the house and its lack of progress. Each time, the slumlord's truck would appear for a day, and then leave without changing a thing. Grandpa said he would block in their driveway, but since they stay home most of the time, it wasn't a major issue. Grandma disagreed. Finally, my grandma had complained enough that officials came out and condemned the house for demolition. This had two major effects. First, the rude neighbors were now practically homeless, since as soon as they and the slumlord ran out of money to pay for the hotel, they'd be stranded. Second, the slumlord still had to pay a shitload of fines for the state of the house. The rest is more his fault than my grandma's actions, but he would refuse to pay and refuse to show up in court, leading to a warrant being put out for his arrest. A few months ago, the demolition teams came and tore down the place, leaving the lot perfectly barren. They even removed the driveway, so now it just looks like an extension of the side yard. My grandparents were not sure of the final state of the neighbors in slumlord, but my grandma looked very pleased with herself as she finished her story. I love her so much.
Next story.
Let me preface this by saying that I'm still going through some mental issues because of what happened in this story. Background: I was born with cataracts that later became glaucoma when I turned 5. After some years, something happened that caused me to lose all vision in my left eye. This meant that I needed an assistant for the rest of my education. Now that you're all informed. The story: when I was starting middle school, my parents found an assistant to help me with moving around my school. I'll call her Ella for simplicity's sake anyway. Ella friendly to me and my parents, so they didn't have to worry. Ella did her job, and she was very friendly with me. And night, be Jane. One day Ella didn't come to school. She called my dad saying that she got in an accident on the road. It was fine. She got an accident. It wasn't her fault. I spent the first 2 weeks of school trying my damnedest to explain why I couldn't write the work and give a convincing argument and walk around without bumping into every wall and person. On top of that, Ella became more and more hostile as the months went by. She then began telling me awful things about my appearance, my personality, and she even talked shit about my parents to other teachers who were just as scummy as her. The only reason why I didn't say anything was because she made me think that doing so would get me expelled. Me being a stupid 13-year-old, I believed her. Needless to say, I was miserable. The straw that broke the camel's back was the day where she was so angry that she slapped me. I was done. The revenge, I told my dad about everything. The absences, the slander, everything. When I told him, he went absolutely apeshit, and we went straight to the principal. After telling her everything that happened, we found out that Ella was present to write herself up as present, but she never arrived to help me. We also found out that she had faked most of her reasons for absence. After a long investigation that took 2 years to actually prove, we took Ella to court. I only had to testify every single detail of what she did and what she said. Long story short, we won that case and Ella went to prison for 3 years. After word got out of what Ella did too, my family had heard that her friends and family basically disowned her. She also lost the remaining custody of her kids, which went directly to her ex-husband, who works as a vendor that passes by my school. Ella became forgotten garbage. It's been almost a whole year since Ella went to prison, but I sometimes still hear all the terrible things she said. Thanks to her, I'm scared to make decisions because I can't get her words out of my mind. I'm going to start school soon. Maybe I'll finally get that demon woman out of my head. Edit. Thank you all for the kind words. Honestly, I thought that this was going to get ignored. At the time of writing this, I'm going to start my 2nd year of high school. I'm just happy that even strangers on the internet are willing to say such nice things. Thank you all for the support. Edit 2.0. Oh my God, thank you for the silver. I've noticed some comments confused about my condition. I'll clarify. To be perfectly honest, I don't really know how it happened. I don't remember since it was a long time, at least for me. After Ella stopped being nice is when I started seriously learning how to use a cane for blind people.
Next story.
So I was a sailor. I was the trainee engineer. It's a title in engineering department of merchant ship. I had a very evil second engineering officer. He was just below the chief engineer, but his relative owned the shipping company, which owns the ship we were sailing in, so basically he ruled over even the captain on board, who was a very good mentor to me and a guy I am still friends with. He was very abusive and a very evil human being. He was almost 7 foot tall, huge and intimidating. He was also a Syrian but took refuge in Lebanon with help of his shipowner relative illegally off course. This will come up later. Our ship sailed through Atlantic from Lebanon to Philadelphia, where they load cattle and bring it to Lebanon for meat. Our ship was small, 80 meters long and 30 meters breadth, and each time when we go to the U.S. waters we would repaint the whole ship's interiors. The journey is around 18 to 20 days one side, so there was time to do the whole ship. Also, there was no limited working hours or anything in that ship. It was all under one evil guy, the second engineer. Onto his evil deeds he did to me. He once told me to fight the electrical officer because he was bored. We were working. He said either we fight or there's no going to cabin. I worked for 32 hours straight that time because electrical officer was as old as my father, around 50. He always wakes me up when his shift of watch comes up, even though my watch starts 4 hours later. And it's not for working. It's to bring him tea from the mess, and after giving him tea, massage his shoulders and back for around 30 minutes. He would always make me do 2 people's job by myself. like lifting motors that weighed more than me. This has given me back problems for life. My lower discs are screwed up for life. Once he threw a makeshift Molotov at me that he made from turpentine and beer bottle. The reason, I discovered him pumping oily water from the bilge, basically a tank at the bottom of the ship, straight to the sea, and questioned him. I don't know how U.S. Port Authority never figured it out by themselves. There's a lot more, but now you get what he was. So we were 3 trainee engineers on board. And we were sailing through Atlantic, and the sea was angry af. We were rolling 15-20 degrees each side. Me and our ship madly tilting sideways along with the waves. And we were painting the engine room. It was my 18th hour or so, and we are trying hard to keep steady with the paint tin and brushes. Sailors who are reading this would know that he has broken every code in the book by now. So one of my friends who was painting some pipes lost balance and dropped paint on the floor. Second engineer saw this from afar and ran like some wee actor and kicked my friend in the face. Then, when he was down, second engineer kicked and punched the living hell out of him. I still remember my friend asking me what was the point of spending all the money and time to be an engineer if this is what sea life is. We were all first-time sailors. The ship reached Philadelphia, and the rule among us was to act like we don't know English or else face the very bad consequences. But before reaching the port, my friend told me we have to end the reign of the bitch you know who, right? The second engineer. I'll call him bitch from now on. So we wrote a letter, a huge one stating everything. From the abuses to the marine law breaking to his gold smuggling. Yes, it was there too. And we waited for Coast Guard to board. They boarded and did their routine checks and all and searched us in our rooms and collected our documents for further looking up. Man, US is strict. Then the Port Authority came along and they have a person who talks to every crew members and finding if anything suspicious is going on. When she got to me, I told her everything and showed the letter signed by 35ths of our crew. Then we told her about the abuse and all. She was livid. She checked CACTV and sure it's all erased. Then Port Authority did a thorough inspection on the engine room and found the bilges emptied to the sea, which is like major crime in marine world. In the end, bitch got arrested in U.S. soil, and they tried sending him to Lebanon, but his passport was fake. It was not even his real name. He was illegal immigrant in Lebanon. He got immediately sent to Syria. The rest told by the captain later to me. He was a criminal who was on lookout by the Syrian police. I don't know why, but it was something about joining the army or something. His relative escaped him from there and made fake passport and documents and sent him to sail, which still happens in a lot of ships. He got arrested and later killed by gunfire in his own country. All his relatives escaped to Lebanon before all this, so there was no one to even take his body. He died like a dog. I hope you are burning in the deepest, hottest hellhole. Fairs.